I'm Stephanie Miller, 32, and what should have been a simple birthday dinner for my dad turned into the ultimate validation I never knew I needed. My relationship with my sister Kimberly has always been complicated, filled with her subtle jibes about my life choices and constant skepticism about my success. When my black card was declined at the upscale restaurant where I was treating my family for Dad's 60th birthday, Kimberly couldn't hide her smug satisfaction. But what happened next changed our family dynamic forever. Before I get into how my black card drama turned into the most satisfying moment of my life, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about family drama and sweet revenge. Growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Boston, our family of four was typical in many ways. My father Robert, now turning 60, worked as an engineer at a local firm, while my mother Diane, 58, taught at the elementary school a few blocks from our home. My sister Kimberly, 3 years my senior at 35, and I shared a bedroom until I was 14, when Dad converted our basement into a space for me. That physical separation was perhaps symbolic of how different our paths would become. Kimberly was always the perfect child, straight A's, captain of the debate team, homecoming queen, and later, acceptance to an Ivy League college. She followed a traditional trajectory that our parents easily understood: college, career as an accountant, marriage to Jason, her college sweetheart, 2 kids, and a house in the suburbs with the white picket fence. Her life unfolded exactly as expected, and our parents proudly displayed her graduation photos, wedding portraits, and family Christmas cards on every available surface of their living room. I was different from the start. School was never my strong suit, not because I wasn't smart, but because I was restless. Traditional education felt constraining. While I struggled with subjects like literature and history, I excelled in my business electives and anything that involved creative problem solving. By 16, I was buying items from garage sales and reselling them online for profit. By 18, I had saved enough to buy my first investment property, a tiny, rundown studio apartment that I renovated myself and rented out to college students. "It's just a phase," Kimberly would say to our parents whenever my latest venture came up at dinner. "She'll realize she needs a degree eventually." Her tone always carried that unmistakable big sister condescension. Mom and Dad's reactions to our different paths were mixed. Mom worried about my future without a college degree, often slipping college brochures under my bedroom door well into my 20s. Dad, however, seemed to secretly admire my entrepreneurial spirit. He'd pull me aside after family dinners where Kimberly had subtly belittled my career choices. "You remind me of my brother," he'd tell me, referring to my Uncle James, who had built a successful construction company from scratch. Not everyone's path looks the same. Family gatherings became a battleground of subtle digs and passive-aggressive comments. Thanksgiving at 22 stands out vividly. I had just secured my first significant investment deal, but when I tried to share my excitement, Kimberly interrupted. "That's nice, Steph. Speaking of real accomplishments, Jason just got promoted to senior manager." She squeezed her husband's hand as my news evaporated into the air, forgotten. That same year, I decided to leave Boston. The constant comparison and undermining was stifling my growth. I moved to Chicago, then later to New York, building my business portfolio along the way. During those early years, I struggled living in tiny apartments, working 18-hour days, reinvesting every penny I earned. I limited my visits home to Christmas and occasionally Thanksgiving, calling Mom and Dad weekly but keeping details of my financial struggles vague to avoid giving Kimberly ammunition. For nearly 5 years, my family had limited insight into my life. I avoided social media, partly to focus on work and partly to maintain privacy about my developing career. When Kimberly would ask pointed questions about my little business ventures, I'd offer minimal information, which she interpreted as failure. "You know you can always come home if things don't work out," she'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Jason might be able to get you an entry-level position at his firm." What my family didn't know was that by my late 20s, I had built a successful tech company that streamlined logistics for small businesses. After securing several rounds of funding and eventually selling a significant stake to a larger corporation, I had become, by any objective measure, wealthy. I had a penthouse apartment in Manhattan, a diverse investment portfolio, and financial independence that exceeded even my own early dreams. When I finally began sharing glimpses of my success, mentioning business trips to Tokyo, displaying photos of my new apartment, or referencing meetings with well-known investors, Kimberly's reaction was disbelief rather than congratulation. Must be nice to rent an expensive apartment you can barely afford just for the Instagram photos, she remarked when I showed Mom pictures of my new place. Those designer shoes are probably knockoffs, she whispered to our cousin when I wore low buttons to a family wedding. I wonder how long you can keep up this facade, she said directly to me during a rare moment alone at Mom's birthday last. What hurt most wasn't her skepticism about my success, but the implication that I would lie about it, that I was somehow fraudulent rather than accomplished. Despite having no evidence beyond her own assumptions, Kimberly had decided that my lifestyle was all for show, a desperate attempt to appear successful rather than actual success. For my part, I never directly confronted her assumptions. Pride, perhaps, or a desire to avoid conflict kept me from laying out my financial statements on the family dinner table and demanding recognition. I told myself her opinion didn't matter, that I knew the truth of my hard work and achievements. But deep down, the constant dismissal from someone who had known me my entire life still stung in ways I wasn't fully willing to admit. When Dad's 60th birthday approached this spring, I was determined to do something special. He had always been my quiet supporter, the one who slipped me business books when I was a teenager and defended my unconventional choices when relatives questioned them. A milestone birthday deserved a memorable celebration. During our weekly Sunday call, I suggested hosting dinner at Maxwell's, an upscale restaurant in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood that had recently been awarded a Michelin star. I've been there for business dinners a few times, I explained, omitting that I was actually an investor in their restaurant group. The food is incredible, and I'd love to treat everyone. Oh honey, that place is too expensive, Mom immediately protested. We can celebrate at Riccardo's. Riccardo's was the local Italian restaurant where we'd celebrated family birthdays for decades. It's my treat, Mom, I insist. I could hear the hesitation in her silence. Well, if you're sure you can manage it, she finally said. Later that day, our family group chat lit up with plans. Mom, Stephanie is taking us to Maxwell's for Dad's birthday. Dad, wow, looking forward to it. Never been there. Kimberly, Maxwell's, isn't that super expensive? Me, don't worry about it, it's my gift to Dad. Kimberly, hope you're not maxing out your credit cards just to impress everyone. Jason, sounds great, what time? I ignored Kimberly's comment and confirmed the reservation for Saturday night at 7. The passive-aggressive emoji seemed childish coming from a 35-year-old woman, but I was determined not to let her attitude spoil the evening. In the weeks leading up to the dinner, I carefully selected a gift for Dad, a vintage Omega Seamaster watch from 1963, his birth year. He'd always admired these watches but would never spend that kind of money on himself. I had it professionally restored and engraved with his initials and the date. On the evening of the dinner, I took extra care getting ready in my hotel room. I'd flown in from New York that morning and booked a suite at the Four Seasons, partly for convenience and partly to avoid the inevitable tension of staying at my parents' house where Kimberly and her family would also be crashing. I chose a simple but elegant black Chanel dress, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, and classic Manolo Blahnik heels. Professional success had taught me that true luxury often speaks in whispers rather than shots, and I preferred understated elegance to flashy logos. As my car service pulled up to Maxwell's, I took a deep breath and reminded myself that tonight was about Dad, not about the ongoing tension with my sister. I was greeted warmly at the door by Thomas, the maitre d'. Miss Miller, wonderful to see you again, he said with genuine warmth. Your family hasn't arrived yet, but we have your regular table ready. The restaurant exuded subtle luxury, soft lighting from crystal chandeliers, cream-colored walls adorned with original artwork, plush carpeting that muffled footsteps and conversations, creating an atmosphere of privacy and exclusivity. I was led to a corner table with an excellent view of both the Boston skyline and the restaurant's interior. 20 minutes later, I spotted my parents entering. Dad looked handsome in a new navy suit that Mom had mentioned buying for the occasion, and Mom wore a floral dress with a cashmere cardigan. I stood to wave them over, and Dad's face lit up when he saw me. There's my girl, he called out, a bit too loudly for the refined atmosphere, but his enthusiasm made me smile. He wrapped me in a bear hug while Mom kissed my cheek. This place is something else, Dad whispered, looking around appreciatively. Wait until you taste the food, I promised. 10 minutes later, Kimberly and Jason arrived. My sister wore a red cocktail dress that seemed slightly too formal for the occasion, while Jason looked uncomfortable in his suit, tugging at his collar as they approached. Sorry we're late, Kimberly announced without actually apologizing. The babysitter was late, and traffic was horrible. Her eyes scanned my outfit, lingering on my shoes and handbag. Wow, breaking out all the designer stuff tonight, huh? You look lovely too, I replied, choosing to ignore the barb. I'm glad you could make it. We ordered drinks, a special scotch for Dad, wine for Mom and Kimberly, and Jason and I both opted for the specialty cocktails. As we sipped, I noticed Kimberly's eyes darting around the restaurant, taking in the well-dressed patrons and elegant decor. So this is where all the trust fund babies hang out, she remarked, loud enough for nearby diners to hear. Actually, most of the clientele are business professionals, I corrected gently. The chef has quite a following among foodies. Right, because you're such an expert on fine dining now, she replied with a thin smile. I caught Dad's eye, and he gave me a small, sympathetic nod. The evening was just beginning, and already I could feel the familiar tension building. I took another sip of my drink and silently reminded myself that this night wasn't about me or Kimberly, it was about celebrating the man who had always believed in me, even when my path didn't make sense to anyone else. Mr. and Mrs. Miller, we're delighted to have you dining with us tonight, said Marcel, the head server, as he approached our table. Miss Miller is one of our most valued guests, and we're honored to help celebrate your birthday, sir. My father beamed at the special attention, while my mother looked slightly embarrassed by the fuss. Kimberly's eyes narrowed slightly. Most valued guest, you must spend a fortune here, she muttered as Marcel walked away. I entertain clients sometimes, I replied vaguely, not wanting to get into details about my relationship with the restaurant. Shall we order some appetizers? Marcel returned with complimentary champagne for the table, a gesture I knew was standard for regular patrons, but which clearly surprised my family. To Dad, I said, raising my glass. Happy 60th birthday to the man who taught me to follow my own path and never give up. To Dad, everyone echoed, and for a moment there was genuine warmth around the table. That warmth dissipated quickly when Kimberly decided to comment on the champagne. Must be nice to get free drinks. Is it because you flirt with the staff, or do they feel sorry for you dining alone so often? Kimberly, my mother admonished quietly. It was just a joke, my sister replied with a forced laugh. Stephanie knows I'm kidding. I focused on the menu, recommending the truffle risotto and the sea bass to my parents. When it came time to order wine, I suggested a bottle of Chateau Margaux that I knew would pair perfectly with our entrees. Jesus, Steph, that's a $500 bottle, Kimberly exclaimed after glancing at the wine list. Are you seriously trying to show off that much? It's a special occasion, I said evenly, and it's my treat. It just seems excessive, she continued, looking to our parents for support. Dad would probably be just as happy with the house red, wouldn't you, Dad? Before our father could respond, I interjected, Dad deserves the best tonight, please, let me do this. The sommelier appeared with the wine, performing the tasting ritual with my father as the guest of honor. Dad, who typically drank beer or basic scotch, looked slightly uncomfortable but played along, nodding appreciatively after his sip. It's good, he said, though I could tell he didn't fully appreciate the complexity of what he was drinking. It better be for that price, Kimberly commented, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. As our appetizers arrived, a selection of seasonal specialties including seared scallops, foie gras, and a truffle arancini, the conversation mercifully turned to more neutral topics. Dad talked about his plans for retirement in a few years, and Mom shared stories about her garden club's latest project. The momentary peace was broken when Jason asked about my work. So how's the business going? Still doing that tech thing? He asked between bites. Before I could answer, Kimberly jumped in. Oh, she never gives straight answers about that. It's all very mysterious and important, isn't it, Steph? It's going well, I said, directing my response to Jason. We expanded to European markets last quarter, and we're looking at potential opportunities in Asia now. Wow, that sounds impressive, Jason said, seeming genuinely interested. Doesn't it, though? Kimberly's voice dripped with skepticism. Every time we hear about Stephanie's business, it's always expanding and succeeding in these vague, impressive-sounding ways. Yet somehow she never has photos of her office or introduces us to any of these international colleagues. I don't post about work on social media much, I explain, feeling the familiar frustration rising. And my colleagues are in New York or overseas, so when would you have met them? I'm just saying, it all sounds very convenient, she replied with a shrug. Designer clothes, fancy restaurants, mysterious successful business. You've crafted quite an image. It's not an image, Kim. Sure, she said dismissively. Pass the butter, would you? The main courses arrived perfectly prepared and artfully presented. The conversation lulled as everyone began eating, with occasional murmurs of appreciation for the food. I started to hope that perhaps the excellent meal would override the tension. That hope was short-lived. So, Kimberly said, setting down her fork and looking directly at me, that purse you're carrying. Is that a real Chanel, or one of those good fakes from Canal Street? I have a friend who can't tell the difference between her knockoff and the real thing. I took a slow sip of wine before answering. It's authentic. I bought it at the boutique in New York. Must have cost, what, $5,000, for a purse, she pressed, looking at our parents as if for confirmation that this was absurd. That's more than some people's monthly salary. I don't think we need to discuss the cost of Stephanie's personal items, my mother interjected, clearly uncomfortable. I'm just trying to understand her priorities, Kimberly continued. When was the last time you visited the kids, Steph? But you can afford $5,000 handbags. I sent birthday gifts last month, I reminded her. And I was planning to visit next month when I'm back from Tokyo. Tokyo now? Aren't we cosmopolitan, she said with a laugh that contained no humor. Another business trip to post about on Instagram. I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment away from the table. As I was touching up my lipstick, the bathroom door swung open, and Kimberly walked in. What is your problem? I asked before she could speak, my patience finally wearing thin. My problem, she crossed her arms. I'm not the one living a fake life and trying to impress everyone. What exactly do you think is fake about my life? All of it, she exclaimed. The designer clothes, the business talk, the fancy restaurant reservations. You're trying so hard to seem successful and important. Have you considered that maybe I am successful? I countered. That maybe I worked hard and built something real. Please, she scoffed. I know what real success looks like. It's steady, it's consistent, it's verifiable. Not this smoke and mirrors act you've been putting on since you left Boston. You don't know anything about my life because you've never bothered to ask real questions, you just make assumptions. Because you're so secretive. If you were really doing as well as you pretend, you'd be more open about it. A woman emerged from one of the stalls, giving us an awkward glance as she washed her hands and quickly exited. I don't owe you financial statements, Kimberly, and I'm done trying to prove myself to you. I moved toward the door. Let's just get through tonight for Dad's sake. When we returned to the table, Dad was in the middle of a story about fishing with his brother last summer. I forced a smile and tried to focus on his words rather than the simmering tension with my sister. As dessert arrived, a selection of the chef's specialties and a small cake with a candle for Dad, the mood temporarily lightened. Dad closed his eyes for a moment before blowing out the candle, and we all applauded. What did you wish for, honey? Mom asked. If I tell you, it won't come true, he replied with a wink, but then added softly, but it might have something to do with seeing my girls getting along better. Kimberly and I exchanged uncomfortable glances, both momentarily chastened by our father's simple birthday wish. As we finished our desserts, Marcel appeared with a leather folder containing the bill. He discreetly placed it near my side of the table, as I had arranged when making the reservation. I'll take care of this, I said, reaching for the folder. At least let us see what the damage is, Kimberly insisted, trying to peer at the total. It's my gift to Dad, I reminded her, opening the folder to shield the contents from her view. The total was significant, over $2,000 with the wine and special courses, but well within what I had expected and budgeted for. I slipped my black Amex card into the folder and handed it back to Marcel, who thanked me and walked away. A black card, Kimberly's eyebrows shot up. Those are only for people who spend hundreds of thousands a year. What are you trying to prove? I'm not trying to prove anything, I said, my patience wearing dangerously thin. I'm trying to celebrate Dad's birthday. With a flashy credit card that everyone can see, she persisted. It's just so performative. That's enough, Kimberly, Dad said firmly, surprising all of us. Your sister is being generous. Let's appreciate that without the commentary. Kimberly fell silent, though the set of her jaw told me she was far from finished. Minutes passed in awkward conversation about dessert and the restaurant's decor. Then Marcel returned, looking slightly uncomfortable. He leaned down and whispered in my ear, Miss Miller, I'm very sorry, but there seems to be an issue with your card. Could you step aside for a moment? A flush of embarrassment washed over me. I knew my accounts were in perfect order, there must be some technical error. Nevertheless, I felt all eyes on me as I stood. Is something wrong? Kimberly asked, not bothering to hide the note of triumph in her voice. Just a small issue to sort out, I said as casually as possible. Before I could step away, Kimberly's voice rang out, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. Let me guess, the card was declined. All this show, and you can't even pay the bill. My mother gasped. Kimberly, please. No, Mom, it's time someone called this out. Stephanie has been pretending to be some big success, flashing designer labels and expensive restaurants, and it's all fake. She's probably drowning in debt trying to maintain this illusion. The restaurant seemed to grow quiet, or perhaps it was just the blood rushing in my ears. I stood frozen beside the table, mortification washing over me. We'll help you pay the bill, Steph, Kimberly continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she reached for her purse. Though maybe next time stick to something in your actual price range. Miss Miller, Marcel interrupted, now joined by Richard, the restaurant manager. If we could speak privately for a moment. I nodded numbly and followed them to a small alcove near the entrance, aware of my sister's smug expression and my parents' concerned faces. Miss Miller, I'm terribly sorry for the confusion, Richard began, his voice low and respectful. The card didn't actually decline due to insufficient funds. There's a flag on your account because of your investor status with our restaurant group. I blinked, trying to process his words through my embarrassment. What do you mean? As a significant investor in Maxwell's restaurant group, your personal expenses at any of our establishments are automatically comped. The system flagged your card because you're not supposed to be charged at all. I sincerely apologize for the misunderstanding and for any embarrassment this caused you in front of your family. Relief flooded through me, followed quickly by a complicated mix of emotions I couldn't immediately sort. So the bill is already taken care of course. In fact, Mr. Chamberlain, the owner, is in the restaurant tonight and would like to come speak with you and your family personally, if that's all right. He's mortified about the confusion. I nodded, still processing this turn of events. Yes, that would be fine. As we walked back to the table, I could see Kimberly still talking animatedly, likely continuing her narrative about my supposed financial facade. My parents looked uncomfortable, Dad's birthday celebration now thoroughly overshadowed by this drama. I apologize for the confusion, Richard announced to the table as we approached. There was a system error on our end. Miss Miller's card is perfectly fine. Kimberly's narrative stuttered to a halt mid-sentence. In fact, Richard continued, Mr. Chamberlain, the owner of Maxwell's restaurant group, would like to personally apologize for the misunderstanding. As if on cue, Thomas Chamberlain approached our table. In his early 60s, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, he projected the quiet confidence of someone who had built a culinary empire from the ground up. Miss Miller, he greeted me warmly, shaking my hand. I'm terribly sorry about the confusion. This is completely unacceptable. It's all right, Thomas, I said, these things happen. He turned to my family with a charming smile. You must be the Millers. Stephanie has spoken of you often. I'm Thomas Chamberlain, owner of this restaurant and the Maxwell's group. My father stood to shake his hand, looking slightly bewildered. Robert Miller. This is my wife Diane, our daughter Kimberly, and her husband Jason. A pleasure to meet you all. I understand it's your birthday, Mr. Miller. Many happy returns. Thank you, Dad replied. You have a beautiful restaurant. That's kind of you to say. Thomas turned slightly to include the whole table in his next statement. I just wanted to personally apologize for the confusion with the bill. As one of our investors and part owners, Stephanie should never have been presented with a bill in the first place. The silence that followed was deafening. Kimberly's mouth literally hung open, her previous smugness replaced by shock. Part owner, my mother finally managed. Thomas nodded. Stephanie made a significant investment in our restaurant group about 6 months ago. Her insights have been invaluable as we expand to new markets. He turned to me. The Tokyo location is proceeding on schedule, by the way. The team would love your input on the final design elements when you're there next month. I'll make time, I promised, acutely aware of my family's stunned expressions. Wonderful. Now please allow me to make this right. Your dinner is completely on the house, of course, and if you have time, I'd love to give you a tour of our kitchen and wine cellar. Our head chef has prepared a special digestive that I think you'll enjoy, Mr. Miller. Dad, recovering his composure, nodded enthusiastically. That would be wonderful, thank you. As Thomas led us away from the table, I couldn't help but notice Kimberly's face, the color high in her cheeks, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and disbelief. For once, she seemed completely at a loss for words. As we followed Thomas toward the kitchen, the silence among my family members was thick enough to cut with one of the restaurant's expensive steak knives. My father walked beside Thomas, asking interested questions about the restaurant business, while my mother stayed close behind them, occasionally glancing back at me with wide, questioning eyes. Kimberly and Jason trailed at the rear, whispering intensely to each other. I caught fragments of their heated exchange. How was I supposed to know? And completely humiliated us, and never said anything about. The kitchen was a gleaming showcase of stainless steel and orchestrated chaos. Staff members in crisp white uniforms moved with practiced precision around stations filled with sizzling pans and artfully plated dishes. When Thomas introduced me, the executive chef greeted me by name. Miss Miller, wonderful to see you again. The adjustments to the summer menu you suggested have been very well received. The seasonal truffle dish is exceptional, Jean-Pierre, I replied. You've outdone yourself. I was acutely aware of Kimberly's stunned expression as she witnessed this exchange. The staff's deference toward me was undeniable, not the generic courtesy shown to all patrons, but the respect accorded to someone with actual authority. The tour continued through the impressive wine cellar, where Thomas pointed out several rare vintages and explained their meticulous sourcing process. Dad, a casual wine drinker at best, nonetheless seemed genuinely fascinated, asking thoughtful questions that Thomas was delighted to answer. Your daughter has a remarkable palate, Thomas told my father. She identified a flaw in one of our imported wines that even our sommelier missed. Saved us from serving an entire shipment that wasn't up to our standard. Dad glanced at me with unmistakable pride. She's always had good taste, he said. Even as a little girl, she could tell when her mother substituted ingredients in recipe. An important quality in this business, Thomas agreed. Throughout the tour, Kimberly remained uncharacteristically silent, staying slightly apart from the group. Her earlier confidence had evaporated, replaced by visible discomfort as each new revelation further contradicted the narrative she had constructed about my life. When we returned to the main dining room, Thomas had arranged for a complimentary bottle of champagne, a vintage Dom Perignon, to be served at our table. A proper toast for your birthday, Mr. Miller, he said, and a small apology for the earlier confusion. As the champagne was poured, Kimberly finally spoke, her voice lacking its usual certainty. So Stephanie, you actually own part of this place. I'm one of several investors in the restaurant group, I explain, keeping my tone neutral. It includes 8 restaurants across the Northeast, with locations opening in Chicago and Tokyo next quarter. And you never thought to mention this, she pressed, an edge creeping back into her voice. Would you have believed me if I had? I asked quietly. The question hung in the air between us, unanswered because we both knew the truth. For years, Kimberly had dismissed every accomplishment I'd mentioned, interpreted every success as exaggeration or outright fabrication. There had been no point in sharing details that would only be met with skepticism and derision. A toast, Thomas interjected smoothly, raising his glass, to Robert Miller on his 60th birthday. May this year bring you joy, good health, and the pleasure of many more fine meals with your lovely family. To Dad, I echoed, and everyone raised their glasses. After Thomas departed, a subtle but distinct shift in our family dynamic was palpable. Mom asked specific questions about my investment in the restaurant group, listening with genuine interest to my answers. Dad beamed with undisguised pride, occasionally patting my hand as I explained how I'd connected with Thomas through a business associate in New York. Kimberly and Jason exchanged glances but said little. When Kimberly did speak, her tone had lost its edge of superiority, replaced by a forced casualness that didn't quite mask her discomfort. So this is why you know so much about wine, she remarked at one point, trying for levity. Partly, I acknowledge. Though I've always enjoyed learning about it. When it was time to leave, the entire staff lined up to bid us farewell. The chef emerged from the kitchen to personally shake Dad's hand and wish him happy birthday. Thomas walked us to the door, where our cars were already waiting, my parents in one, Kimberly and Jason in another, and my Hyde car at the end. Thank you for a wonderful evening, I told Thomas, embracing him briefly. Sorry about the confusion earlier. Not at all, he insisted. It was entirely our error. I've already spoken to accounting to ensure it doesn't happen again. As we said our goodbyes in the parking lot, there was a moment of awkwardness. Mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "We need to talk properly, sweetie. Soon." Dad embraced me next. "Thank you for tonight, Steph." It was eye-opening in more ways than one. When it came to Kimberly, we hesitated before exchanging a brief, stiff hug. "Safe drive back to the hotel," she said, not quite meeting my eye. "Thanks, give the kids a hug from me." As I settled into the back seat of my car, I watched my family drive away, my parents in one direction, Kimberly and Jason in another. The evening had not gone as planned, but perhaps it had gone as needed. The satisfaction I should have felt at finally being vindicated was tempered by a sadness I hadn't expected. Yes, Kimberly had been proven wrong in the most dramatic way possible, but what did that really change? The years of dismissal and judgment couldn't be erased by one evening, no matter how revelatory. The driver caught my eye in the rearview mirror. "Good night, Miss Miller." I considered the question, watching the lights of Boston slide past the window. "Complicated," I finally answered, "but necessary." Back in my hotel suite, I kicked off my heels and poured myself a nightcap from the minibar. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad, "Prouder of you than I can say. Not just for your success, but for your grace tonight. Love you, kiddo." I smiled at the message, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. At least with Dad, no explanations had ever been necessary. He had always seen me clearly, even when others hadn't bothered to look. The days following Dad's birthday dinner passed in a blur of business calls and meetings. I extended my stay in Boston to handle some East Coast client matters, working remotely from my hotel suite rather than immediately returning to New York. My mother called twice, once to thank me again for the dinner and once to ask more detailed questions about my business, showing an interest that felt new and genuine. "I never realized," she admitted during our second call. "I mean, I knew you were doing well, but I didn't understand the scope of what you've built." "It's okay, Mom," I assured her. "I haven't exactly been forthcoming with detail. Still, we should have asked more questions, been more supportive. Especially your father, he's so proud of you, Steph." From Kimberly, there was radio silence for 5 days. No texts, no calls, no appearance in the family group chat where Mom was actively planning Dad's retirement party for next year. Her absence was conspicuous but not surprising. I imagined she was processing her embarrassment, perhaps crafting a new narrative that would preserve her self-image despite the revelations at the restaurant. I was reviewing quarterly projections in my suite's living room when the hotel phone rang. "Miss Miller, there's a Kimberly Brennan here to see you. Shall I send her up?" I hesitated only briefly. "Yes, that's fine, thank you." 7 minutes later, a knock at my door announced my sister's arrival. When I opened it, I found Kimberly standing stiffly in the hallway, looking uncharacteristically unsure of herself. She wore casual clothes, jeans, and a light sweater rather than her usual carefully curated outfits for family occasions. "Can I come in?" she asked when I didn't immediately step aside. "Of course," I moved back, gesturing toward the living area of the suite. "Would you like something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine," she replied, taking in the expansive suite with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor. The space was elegant but understated, not flashy luxury, but unmistakable quality in every detail. She perched on the edge of the sofa while I took the armchair opposite. For a long moment, neither of us spoke, the silence filled with years of complicated history. "So," she finally began, "this is real," she gestured vaguely around the suite. "All of it, your success, your wealth." "Yes," I said simply. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" The question sparked a flare of indignation. Would it have mattered if I had? Every time I mentioned anything about my business, you dismissed it or implied I was exaggerating. "Because it seemed so improbable," she countered, defensive. "You left home with barely any savings, no degree, just these big ideas and dreams. Then suddenly you're jetting around the world, wearing designer clothes, talking about investments and business meetings. What was I supposed to think? Maybe that your sister was working incredibly hard and succeeding? Maybe that all those big ideas and dreams actually had substance?" "It's not that simple," she insisted. "You disappeared for years, hardly sharing anything about your life. Then you reappeared with this persona of success. It felt like you were playing a role." "It wasn't a role, Kim, it was my life, my real life that I built while you were busy assuming I was failing." She winced at that. I didn't always think you were failing. I just worried you were getting in over your head. No, I said firmly, years of frustration finally finding voice. You weren't worried about me, you were invested in me not succeeding. There's a difference. Her head snapped up, eyes flashing. That's not fair. Isn't it? From the moment I chose a different path than yours, you've been predicting my failure, waiting for it, almost hoping for it. At Dad's birthday, you couldn't hide how pleased you were when you thought my card was decline. You were practically gloating. She began, then stopped, seeming to consider her words carefully. Maybe there's some truth to that, she admitted finally, surprising me, but it's not because I wanted you to fail. It's because... She trailed off, looking down at her hands. Because what? I pressed. Because you made it look so easy, the words burst from her like they'd been contained too long. You walked away from all the rules I followed. College, career ladder, marriage, mortgage, I did everything right, everything that was expected. And it's been fine. Life is fine. There was something devastating in the way she said fine, a quiet admission of mediocrity that had never factored into my image of my seemingly perfect sister. Meanwhile, she continued, you broke all the rules and ended up more successful than I ever imagined. Do you know how that feels, to wonder if you wasted years of your life following a path that might not have been the best one after all? I sat back, truly seeing my sister perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. The competitive, judgmental woman I'd been defending against was suddenly revealed as something more complicated, someone dealing with her own insecurities and regrets. It wasn't easy, Kim, I said softly. Those years when I wasn't coming home much. I was working 18-hour days, living in a studio apartment with a mattress on the floor, putting every penny back into the business. There were nights I cried myself to sleep wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake. You never told us that. Would you have believed me if I had? Or would you have seen it as confirmation that I was failing and should come home, get a real job like you always suggested? She didn't answer directly, which was answer enough. And even if you had believed me, I continued, would you have been sympathetic, or secretly satisfied that your predictions were coming true? Her cheeks flushed. That's not fair. Maybe not, but it's honest, and I think we're overdue for honesty, don't you? She was quiet for a long moment. I always felt like I had to be perfect, she finally said, the responsible one, the one who did everything right. Then you came along and just refused to follow the same rules, and somehow that worked out better for you. Different, not better, I corrected. My life isn't perfect, Kim. I have a successful business, yes, but I work constantly. I've had 2 serious relationships fall apart because I couldn't balance work and personal life. I have colleagues and acquaintances, but few close friends because I never stay in one place long enough. There are trade-offs to every choice. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. I guess I never thought about it that way. From the outside, it just looked like you'd bypassed all the struggles and gone straight to the rewards. Nobody bypasses the struggles, I said. We just choose which struggles we're willing to endure. Another silence fell between us, but it felt different now, less hostile, more contemplative. I'm sorry, she said eventually, for what I said at the restaurant. And, for a lot of things before that, probably. I'm sorry too, I replied. For keeping you at a distance, for not trying harder to make you understand my choices. She gave a small, sad smile. Would it have made a difference if you had? I don't know, I admitted. Maybe not, but I could have tried. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the harbor. We've never really known how to be sisters as adults, have we? No, I agreed, joining her at the window. We got stuck in our childhood roles and never figured out how to move past them. Is it too late? She asked, and there was a vulnerability in her voice I hadn't heard since we were very young. I don't think so, I said carefully, but it would take work, on both sides. She nodded, still looking out at the water. I'd like to try, if you would. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. There were too many years of hurt and misunderstanding between us for that. But it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that perhaps we'd both contributed to the distance between us, and both had reasons to want to bridge it. When Kimberly left an hour later, after we'd talked more openly than we had in years, I felt emotionally drained but strangely hopeful. We hadn't solved everything, far from it, but we'd at least started speaking truths instead of assumptions, and that felt like progress. Alone in my suite, I poured myself a glass of wine and returned to the window. The lights of Boston twinkled below, familiar yet different from the city I'd left years ago. I thought about success and what it really meant, not just the material markers like this suite or my apartment in New York, but the deeper satisfactions of creating something meaningful, of being true to my own path despite doubts and difficulty. And I thought about family, how we carry our childhood roles and wounds into adulthood, how easy it is to keep playing the same parts in the same old stories unless we consciously choose to write new ones. The truth was, as satisfying as it had been to have my success validated so dramatically at the restaurant, the conversation with Kimberly today felt like the more significant breakthrough. Not because she had finally acknowledged my achievements, but because we had begun to see each other as complex adults rather than the simplified versions of ourselves that had existed in each other's minds for too long. I sipped my wine and watched a boat glide across the harbor, its lights reflecting on the dark water. There was still a long way to go with my sister, and part of me wondered if we'd truly be able to build something new after so many years of mutual misunderstanding. But for the first time in a very long time, I felt a cautious optimism about the possibility. 1 month after the birthday dinner incident, I hosted my family at my apartment in New York for the first time. It was a significant step, inviting them into my actual living space rather than meeting on neutral ground or at their home. My apartment wasn't the ostentatious penthouse Kimberly had likely imagined, but a spacious, warm loft in Tribeca with hardwood floors, exposed brick walls, and carefully chosen art and furniture that reflected my personal taste rather than status symbol. I'd spent the day preparing, not just cleaning and arranging flowers, but mentally preparing myself for this new chapter in our family dynamic. Therapist, yes, successful people need therapy too, had helped me set realistic expectations. This isn't about perfect harmony, she'd reminded me. It's about authentic connection. That includes the messy parts. My parents arrived first, my father hugging me tightly before walking around the apartment with undisguised curiosity and pride. "This place is fantastic, Steph," he said, examining my collection of vintage cameras displayed on a bookshelf. "It's so, you." "Thanks, Dad, that means a lot." My mother brought a homemade apple pie, insisting on putting it in the oven to warm even though I'd arranged for a gourmet dessert delivery. Some maternal habits never change, and I found I didn't mind. There was something comforting about her fussing in my kitchen, something that bridged the gap between my childhood and adult lives. When Kimberly and Jason arrived 30 minutes later, there was a moment of awkwardness at the door, neither of us quite sure how to navigate this new territory where old patterns no longer fit but new ones hadn't fully formed. "This is a beautiful building," Kimberly said as I took their coats. "The security downstairs is impressive." "One of the reasons I chose it," I replied. "That and the natural light." As I showed them around, I noticed Kimberly taking everything in, not with the critical eye I had come to expect, but with genuine interest. She asked about a painting in my dining area, and I explained it was by an emerging artist I'd discovered at a small gallery in Brooklyn. "It's stunning," she said sincerely. "You always did have an eye for potential." It was a small moment, but significant, an acknowledgement of a strength she'd previously dismissed. Over dinner catered by a local restaurant I'd invested in, the conversation flowed more easily than I could remember in years. My father asked detailed questions about my business expansion plans, showing an engagement with my work that felt new and gratifying. "So you're considering a new investment in sustainable tech?" he asked, leaning forward with interest. "What's the market outlook on that?" "Growing rapidly," I explained, "especially with the new regulations coming into effect next year." What struck me was his genuine curiosity, not just polite interest, but real engagement with the substance of my work. He asked follow-up questions that showed he was truly listening, truly trying to understand this world I'd built that had been largely invisible to him until recently. My mother, too, showed a new attentiveness, asking about my daily routines and the challenges of managing teams across different time zones. It was as if they were finally seeing me as a full adult with a complex professional life, rather than their daughter who had chosen an unconventional path they didn't quite understand. "Do you ever get lonely?" Mom asked during a lull in conversation. "Living so far from family, traveling so much." The question might have irritated me a month ago, seeming like criticism of my choices, but tonight I recognized it as genuine concern. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but I've built a good network of friends and colleagues, and I'm learning to create better balance." Kimberly, who had been relatively quiet during the business discussion, joined in now. "That's something I've struggled with too, actually. Finding balance between work and everything else." Really, I couldn't hide my surprise. You always seem to have it all figured out. She gave a short laugh. Hardly. I just got better at looking like I did. There was a vulnerability in her admission that felt new, a willingness to let the perfect facade slip a bit. Jason squeezed her hand supportively, and I realized there were dimensions to their relationship I'd never bothered to observe before. After dinner, as we moved to the living room with coffee and dessert, the conversation shifted to family memories, some funny, some poignant. We recalled the summer vacations to Cape Cod, the holiday disasters, the infamous turkey fire of 2009, the shared experiences that had shaped us all. Remember when Stephanie decided to sell Dad's old comic books at a yard sale? Kimberly said, laughing. She'd priced them all at 50 cents, and Dad nearly had a heart attack when he saw his rare editions in the box. My first lesson in market research, I acknowledged with a grin. Always know the value of what you're selling. You are always the entrepreneur, Dad said fondly. Even when you were selling lemonade, you had to add special flavors and fancy straws to differentiate your product. Meanwhile, I was the one making sure we had the proper permits, Kimberly added, and we all laughed at the truth of it. There was something healing about revisiting these shared memories, acknowledging the different roles we'd played even as children, not as points of contention, but as complementary parts of our family story. Later, as Jason helped Dad with something on his new smartphone and Mom explored my bookshelf, Kimberly joined me on the balcony where I'd stepped out for a moment of quiet. This isn't what I expected, she admitted, looking out at the city lights. What did you expect? I don't know, something showier, I guess, more status-oriented. I nodded, understanding. That was never really my thing. The success matters to me because it represents freedom and impact, not because of how it looks to others. She was quiet for a moment. I think I've spent too much time worrying about how things look. The right neighborhood, the right schools for the kids, the right social circles. She trailed off, then added, it's exhausting, actually. It doesn't have to define you, I said gently. I know, I'm working on that. She turned to face me. I've started taking painting classes again, did Mom tell you? No, I said, surprised and pleased. Kimberly had been talented in art as a teenager but had abandoned it for more practical pursuits. It's just a local community center thing, once a week, but it's mine. Something I do just because I love it, not because it checks some box on the perfect life checklist. That's great, Kim, really. Yeah, she smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. It is. When my family left that evening, the goodbyes were warmer, more authentic than they had been in years. My father hugged me tightly, whispering, I always knew you'd find your way, Steph, I just didn't know it would be such an amazing path. My mother fussed about leftovers and made me promise to call more often. Jason thanked me sincerely for the evening. And Kimberly hugged me without the stiffness that had characterized our physical interactions for years. We should do this more often, she said. Maybe next time you can come to us. Nothing fancy, just family. I'd like that, I replied and meant it. After they left, I moved around my apartment, tidying up and reflecting on the evening. There had been moments of awkwardness, certainly, and old patterns didn't disappear overnight. But there had also been genuine connection, authentic interest, and a sense that we were all really trying to see each other more clearly. In the weeks and months that followed, our family dynamic continued to evolve. Not perfectly, not without occasional setbacks or misunderstandings, but with a foundation of greater honesty and respect than before. My father began calling me for advice on his retirement investments. My mother stopped sending me job listings for positions with stable companies and instead share articles related to my industry. And Kimberly and I began having sister dinners when I was in Boston, just the two of us, gradually rebuilding a relationship that had been strained for too long. The truth I came to understand was that wealth and success hadn't really changed me as much as they'd changed how others perceived me. The validation I'd received at the restaurant that night wasn't about the black card or the owner's deference, it was about finally being seen for who I truly was and what I had actually accomplished. Not through my own declarations, which could be dismissed as boasting, but through external confirmation that was impossible to deny. But the deeper lesson was that true wealth wasn't measured in investment portfolios or property ownership. It was found in authentic relationships based on genuine understanding and acceptance rather than projections or assumptions. For years, I had kept my family at a distance, protecting myself from their judgment by revealing less and less of my actual life. in doing so, I had contributed to a very disconnect I resented. Kimberly had been wrong about me in many ways, but I had been wrong about her too, seeing only the critical, competitive sister rather than the complex woman struggling with her own insecurities and regrets. We had both been trapped in stories we'd written about each other long ago, stories that no longer served either of us. The irony wasn't lost on me that after years of seeking validation and recognition from my family, it was only when I stopped needing their approval that I finally received it. The success I had achieved was meaningful not because it impressed them, but because it represented my authentic path, the life I had chosen despite doubts and difficulties, the vision I had pursued when easier roads were available. In the end, the black card incident at my father's birthday dinner wasn't really about proving my sister wrong. It was about all of us being given an opportunity to see beyond our fixed perceptions of each other, to recognize that people grow and change, that success takes many forms, and that family relationships, like all important things in life, require continuous reinvention and renewal. That night might have started with embarrassment and tension, but it ultimately opened a door to something more valuable than any validation: the chance for a family to begin again, to know each other not as the people we once were, but as the people we had become. So if you've ever been underestimated by family, if you've struggled to be seen for who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be, know that breakthroughs can happen in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes it takes a dramatic moment to shatter old perceptions, but what matters most is what you build in the aftermath. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed how your family saw you? Or have you had to confront your own misperceptions about someone close to you? Share your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell if you want to hear more stories about family dynamics, success, and the complicated journey of being seen for who you really are. Thank you for listening, and remember, true wealth is measured not by what you own, but by the authentic connections you create along the way.